than with 2 eyes to be thrown into Gehenna, where their worms do not die and the fire is not quenched. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to the Lord Jesus Christ.
In 1976, I took a teaching job at Beckman High School in Dyersville, and my classroom was in the third hallway, the end room right next to the cafeteria. And during the first lunch period, the 7th and 8th grade kids were eating, and I was teaching sophomores, and they seemed to get louder and louder, and I heard it through the wall. So finally one day I decided I was going to go out and straighten them out. And as I walked around the corner, a bunch of boys, and of course those sitting with their backs to me couldn't see me, so I walked up behind and I heard one of the kids say, "You have to fill in the blanks, okay? They blank, don't put much blank salt on these potatoes." I grabbed his shirt and I said, "What did you say?" "Well, they don't put much salt on these potatoes." I said, "That's not what you said. And if I ever hear you say it again, I'm going to drag you down to Father Guter's office, and you explain to Father Guter what those words mean, if you even know what they mean." So I was going back to my room, and I turned around, and he said something, and I didn't hear him, and everybody laughed. Ooh, that ticked me off, but I had to go back to this classroom. I couldn't do anything about it at that time. So I wanted to, after school, to find out who this kid was, and I was new and I didn't know them very well and all that. But after school that day, I went downtown. There was a new shop, a boutique that some lady had opened, and I'd never been there before, selling antiques and whatever. So I walked in and I met the lady who owned it, introduced myself, and told her that I was a new teacher at Beckman. And then I moved around the shop, and 2 little boys come in. And I turn around, and the one boy says, "Hi, Mom." And it was that little mouthy kid. And the lady said, "Mr. Cruzy, this is my son, Frank." "Oh," I said, "I met Frank. Didn't he tell you?" And she said, "No." And that kid tore out of there like it was. So after a few minutes, I didn't tell the mother a thing. So after a few moments, I was going to leave, and she said, "Why don't you come and join us for dinner tonight?" And I said, "I'd love to." So it was 6 o'clock. I was to be there, and I was there early, and she went out and rang a bell on the deck, and there had 7 children, and Frank walks in and sees me, just about dies. It's the most wonderful thing that could ever happen to him after what he did to me that day. And so I asked to sit next to Frank. So during the entire meal, I kept passing him the salt shaker. Do you know, every year, often at Christmas and Easter, we hear protests from people who claim their constitutional rights are violated, what they call as spiritual and religious propaganda. They feel that they are being offended. They are non-believers and atheists. A lady in Denver, Colorado, filed suit against a homeowner who displayed in front of their home in their association a statue of St. John Paul II. And they filed, and they had to remove it. Several families filed suit, and they won in Clarion, Iowa. They objected to a live nativity scene in front of the courthouse. The Omaha Public Schools will no longer allow at invocations prayer or any kind of religious anything. It violates people's rights. You know, I'm tired of my Christian rights being violated. I am tired of vulgar language that people just use. I came out of a restaurant the other day, and a bunch of guys were talking so crudely, and I was standing there with my collar, mean a thing to them. You know, I freely choose not to go to most movies. I'm not going to pay $10 or whatever to see people do what they do and violate marriage vows and have to listen to foul language. I'm paying $5 or $10 for that. I can hear it on the street. Do you know, our faith in our tradition as Catholics is a developmental one. Baptism and reconciliation and Eucharist leads us to the point where we confirm our faith. Our faith is a movement through life, learning the right and the good, and then finding the grace to overcome evil, to attain heaven. We read in the gospel today what Jesus said, for one who leads another astray, they're better be thrown in a creek with a stone around their neck. You know, today's gospel is an invitation from Jesus in our process to ask, do our words or our language or our actions cause another one to go astray, particularly our children or grandchildren? To what extent do we make an effort to help and guide others who are going astray? You know, answering these questions honestly forces us to look at our lives, to look at our behavior and our habits, and to appreciate the vital role we play in being an example to others. I was in the 8th grade. I'll never forget it. Had a big fight with my brother. And when I got far enough away that he couldn't catch me, I said some terrible things. And then I hadn't the words out of my mouth, and somebody grabbed me around my neck. And it was my dad. And he said, have you ever heard your dad say things like that? I never did. Never heard my dad use God's name or use a foul word. Sometimes he made reference to manure, but he shoveled it all the time. That makes a difference. You know, I was really affected so positively by my father's example. Before we sleep tonight, it would be good to reread today's gospel. I'd say tear it out of the missalette, but we've got Mass tomorrow. We can't do that. You know, we need to be reminded. I really don't know whatever happened to Frank. He still may have a foul mouth, but I'll tell you, I bet he never forgets to salt his potatoes.